Santiago, Chile is a huge metropolis, bustling and busy. I spent 2 summer days in the city on my way to Antarctica and plan to see as much of the city as time would allow. On my first day in Santiago, I arrived early in the morning, jet-lagged from a long flight. I was committed to keeping busy, though, in order to get on Chilean time. Another traveler and I decided to visit the Barrio Italiano. It was recommended by the hotel concierge as a hip place to hang out, grab some food, and explore some interesting shops. It was 10 a.m. on a Sunday morning and the shops didn't open until 11, but it was fun to stroll down the streets and admire the murals. And let me say here that Santiago is full of murals, but also full of graffiti. Just about every flat surface in Santiago is covered in graffiti. I was happy to see that in this neighborhood, the graffiti artists respected the mural artists and left their work alone. The murals were creative and fascinating and were the highlight of the visit. We walked all the streets of the barrio and window shopped. Eventually we found a cafe and enjoyed a nice breakfast. We then took an Uber to the Sky Costanera, which is the tallest building in South America. We were dropped off at the building, but it took a bit of sleuthing to find the entrance to the tower, which was actually in the basement. Once there, you were treated to floor-to-ceiling windows and 360-degree views of Santiago. There was a second level that was equally expansive, and it had a fun photo op spot. Unfortunately, there was a layer of smog or smoke over the city that day, so it was hard to see anything with clarity. We were told there were wildfires in the area contributing to the air pollution. I'm sure it would have been striking to see the Andes Mountains from this high vantage point, but it was too smoky to see more than a hint of them. So it was a bit of a disappointment, but it did give us some perspective on the various landmarks in the city. Back down from the tower, there's a walkway that crosses the street and sends you by escalator down to rows and rows of street vendors. We inspected some of the wares as we headed back to the hotel by foot. That evening, we booked a dinner reservation at this restaurant that has a name I can't pronounce. It was an excellent meal, though, with great service. The next day, we booked a guided tour with a local. It turned out that we were the only 2 clients, so it was nice to have the guide to ourselves. We met him in front of a theater, walked through some residential areas, across the river, and into Metropolitan Park. You could take the Sky Tram from there to the top of San Cristobal Hill, but instead we walked up a rocky pathway. I started to think the hike would test my endurance when we connected to a slightly inclined road that made for easy walking. It also gave us great views of the city that improved the higher we got. Eventually we ended up at the Japanese Gardens, which I think is a bit of a best-kept secret. It is a small garden, and typical of Japanese gardens, it is tightly manicured, quiet, and serene. But what was most outstanding were the views from the garden. You could see the entire city below with the Sky Costanera standing out. Here are some of the beautiful views from the garden. We then continued our hike up the mountain to Mapulemu Jardin. It was another gorgeous setting, high up on the mountain, but it had very few people. It didn't seem to be a tourist destination. It would have been a fabulous spot for a picnic. Throughout the park were these Chilean palm trees that are incredibly slow growing. They're only found in this small geographic region and are somewhat endangered. Our guide encouraged us to hug one of the trees. From there, we walked just a short distance to a second entrance to the Sky Tram, which was about halfway up the San Cristobal Hill. Evidently, there are 3 ways to get to the top of San Cristobal: bus, Sky Tram, or funicular. However, neither the bus or funicular were running that day. The Sky Tram offered some great views in a speedy ride to the top. Once there, you can see why traveling the top is so popular. There is a gigantic Virgin Mary that has you wondering how they got it all the way to the top of the mountain. Hint, in pieces. When you climb the various levels to stand by the statue, there are more impressive views of the city. For me, this was much more satisfying than the Sky Costanera because you could see how sprawling Santiago is. 46% of the country's population lives in this metropolitan area, and the views from the top of San Cristobal made it much more evident. To the side of the Virgin Mary is a small chapel. I especially like the frescoes that gave the church a modest and minimalist beauty. Surrounding the church are some art installations that are in the shape of a cross. Each one was unique, some more fascinating than others. We were supposed to take the bus down to see views from the other side of the city, but since the bus wasn't running, we took the Sky Tram back down and retraced our steps. When we got back to our hotel, the Antarctic expedition was hosting a motor coach tour to the Plaza de Armas in Santiago's historic center. So I joined the excursion and was deposited in the historic heart of Santiago. It is a hub of activity where you will find street performers, vendors selling handicrafts, and locals enjoying the outdoors. Surrounding the plaza are historical buildings that are architectural masterworks. On one corner of the plaza is the neoclassical Correo Central, or Central Post Office. On the same side of the plaza is a Palacio de la Real Audiencia, built at the start of the 19th century, but which now houses the National Museum of History. Arguably the most prominent draw of the plaza, though, is the Metropolitan Cathedral of Santiago, which is a massive structure that anchors one corner of the plaza. It is an example of both neoclassical and Baroque architecture. It is free and open to the public and always has masses of people wandering through. Besides the grand and impressive architecture, there are beautiful ceiling paintings and carved and intricate woodwork. The walking tour then took us to the Chilean Museum of Pre-Columbian Art, which is dedicated to the study and display of pre-Columbian artworks and artifacts from Central and South America. The museum has over 3,000 pieces representing almost 100 different groups of people, and they do a fabulous job of displaying them. When I visited, I expected to see somewhat crumbling antiquities, so was surprised at the high quality of the artwork and objects. There were many incredibly detailed and expressive pieces of pottery. There was a room dedicated to textiles, and I was especially taken by these large funerary statues in the basement. I buzzed through the museum pretty quickly so I could do some self-exploration in the area. I discovered the Grand Santiago Senate building, which was quite ominous. Several avenues of street vendors, some lovely shops, and this fantastic sculpture. The tour group then walked to the Presidential Palace, which is a majestic neoclassical building. It is massive and takes up the entire length of the block. In front of it is Constitution Square, a large park-like area that allows a good perspective on the building and adds to its grandeur. The palace has survived several political upheavals, including a military coup, an assassination, a dictatorship, and cannon fire. It has been continuously restored and is now a proud reminder of Chilean resilience. So that completed my 2 days in Santiago. I did return to Santiago after Antarctica, but took a day trip from Santiago to Valparaiso, which I will share in a separate video. In closing, I'd like to share some of the artwork in the city. Besides murals, there are sculptures everywhere. I saw several with a man that seemed to be suspended in an unusual way. I just love them. Santiago is rough in many ways, and as a solo traveler, I was repeatedly given safety warnings. However, I love the fact that Santiago has embraced the arts with its murals and sculptures everywhere. It gave the city some much-needed vitality. And if you'd like to follow more of my senior and solo travel journeys, please click subscribe below. Cheers!